Hello, and welcome to our video looking at part one here of the wars of religion going on in Europe during this age of Reformation. In part one of this video, we'll look at the English Reformation and how Henry VIII and Elizabeth I really changed things, and we'll look at the French Wars of Religion. In part two, a different video, we'll look at the Dutch Revolt, and then we'll go back to England and see how their relationship with Spain really changes in the later half of this period. First, today, we're going to start in England, where we'll see how the Protestant Reformation made its way from Germany all the way to England. Now, this really all starts because of this guy named Henry VIII. Now, Henry VIII is going to be the King of England, but he was not meant to be the King of England. His brother, Arthur, was actually supposed to be the king, but he dies at a pretty young age, and Henry is next in line. Now, at first, Henry is a really strong supporter of the Catholic Church, and he began Luther and the Protestant movement. But one of the big things here to know is that Henry had to marry his brother's wife, Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. And he's allowed to do this because Catherine says that she and Arthur never consummated their marriage, that basically, he was too sick. They never did anything. And so, because of that, she's able to marry Henry. But unfortunately, she is not able to give him any male children. And because of this, he looks to divorce her. He thinks that this is a sign from God that they have, committed some great sin, that she's not able to give him a male child. She does give him a female child named Mary, and she's the only child that will survive past infancy from their union. And so he seeks to divorce her because he gets around, and he's like, I got a lot of other kids around here, and there's male, kids in here. You're the problem. It's you. I need a different wife. So he appeals to the Pope and he asks the Pope, can I get a divorce? And the Pope really pretty resolutely tells him, no, you cannot do that. Like, you're married for life. Everybody's sworn to the fact that your wife and your brother had never consummated their marriage. Like, everything's legal. So, with the backing of the English Parliament and clergy, Henry ultimately decides what is best for him in England is to separate himself from the Catholic Church, that he does not need the Pope's permission to get a divorce because as the King of England, he should also be head of the church. And there were plenty of people in Parliament that supported that decision that also saw the Catholic Church as, being a little bit too powerful. So they gathered and led to a decision that England was no longer under the authority of the Pope. And in 1534, the Act of Supremacy declared that the king is the head of the Church of England, not the Pope. And they create a new church called the Anglican Church. So it's the English church. And because of this, Henry's kind of allowed to do whatever he wants because he's now the head of church and state. And I'm sure you've heard the story of Henry VIII before, but he goes on to have six wives in total, where he kills two. One ends up dying on her own, and it's just a whole mess. But because he's the head of the church and state, he gets to do things like that. Now let's look at what happens after Henry dies and who takes over. Now, beyond the Tudors being just a great HBO show or, Six being a great Broadway musical, there's a lot of things going on with this family. He has three legitimate children, a ton of non-legitimate children, but the three legitimate ones are Mary, who is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, Elizabeth, who is the daughter of Anne Boleyn, his second wife, and then Edward, who is the son of his third wife, Jane Seymour. Now, upon his death, Edward takes the throne, but he's kind of a sickly kid. He doesn't live very long after Henry dies, and he dies by the age of 15. So then up next is Mary the First. And Mary, or Bloody Mary, as she is known later, was raised Catholic, just like her very Catholic mother, Catherine of Aragon, and her very Catholic grandparents, Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain. And she tries to reestablish the Catholic Church in England. And she kills a lot of Protestant people to do that. Like, she's very anti Protestant during this time. She's only in charge for about 5 years before she dies from what is now probably considered something like influenza. It's one of those deaths in history where you're like, you kind of wish something worse befell her, but it is what it is. So in her place comes Elizabeth I. Now, Elizabeth was raised Protestant because her mother, Anne Boleyn, converted to Protestantism along with Henry VIII when he married her. Now, she rules England for 44 years, and she's known as the Virgin Queen because she never marries. She knew if she married somebody that he would be the King of England and she would no longer have any power. So, to keep her power, she stays unmarried, which ultimately ends the Tudor dynasty. But what Elizabeth does, in the beginning of her reign at least, she tries to bring the country together and kind of relax a lot of those restrictions that caused the problems in the first place. Now, eventually, kind of as she reigns further on, you do see her start to persecute Catholics as well, mostly because she's getting so much like negative press and attention from Philip II of Spain. And we'll talk more about that conflict later. But she's got lots of Catholic people kind of out to get her, like literally trying to kill her throughout her time on the throne. And she really kind of turns against that kind of unity later in her reign. Okay, so if you thought talking about the Tudors sounded a little soap opera-y, just wait until we get into all of the French War of Religion drama. First, let's take a minute to set the scene. Now, the leading Protestant faith in France is going to be Calvinism. So, John Calvin's ideas of Protestant faith are going to spread through the printing press and everything, and they're going to call these new followers Huguenots. And by 1560, about 10% of France's population is going to be Huguenot. It was a pretty popular message. And of those 10%, that is going to include a large portion of the nobles in France. So, specifically, by this point, it's about 40% of the noble population. And that is going to put them in direct conflict with the Catholic nobles of France. And these Huguenot nobles are going to be strong enough to create their own armies when they start to see a rising tension between them and the Catholic nobles. Now, there's one person that's going to be pretty central to this conflict, and that is Catherine de' Medici. Now, she's considered to be the wife, mother, and mother in law of several different kings. And you'll see here in that red circle how she is related to kind of all the people that are going to be involved in this conflict. So Catherine de' Medici is from the Medici family. You know, the Florentine family, the banking merchants in Italy that basically ran the Renaissance. That's her family. And she marries the King of France, Henry II, and they have three sons together. Then Henry dies of this really terrible jousting accident, and her son Francis II takes over. Francis is only in charge for about a year and a half, and then he dies. He was always kind of sickly. He ends up dying, which then means her 10-year-old son, Charles, has to become the new king of France. So Catherine's going to act as a regent for Charles, kind of ruling for him while he's too young to do so. And they allow this because Catherine is extremely smart, very cutting, and she is from a pretty important family that you do not want to mess with. But she's faced with some problems pretty early on. Not everyone in France right now is Catholic, and the Protestant nobles want more power. So she's trying to navigate that very kind of nuanced line of like not making anybody mad. She herself is only kind of a moderate Catholic, but she knows she has to do something to kind of bring everybody together. Now, there's two big families that are going to lead these two factions. So, on the Huguenot side, the Protestant side are the Bourbons, and they are relative to the Valois family, so the royal family. And there's this guy named Henry of Navarre that's a Bourbon and a Huguenot, and he's going to be important later. And then the other family is the Guise family, who is a militant Catholic family, and they do not want a Bourbon on the throne. They want a Guise on the throne. And Catherine tries to balance these two things. And what ends up happening is basically a big civil war between the Catholic population of France and the Huguenot population of France. And it gets really bloody and really deadly. So she decides to try to end this conflict doing, what a lot of diplomatic noble families would do. She tries to marry her Catholic daughter, Margaret, to Henry of Navarre, who is on the Bourbon Huguenot side. And she plans this elaborate wedding in Paris. And the Duke of Guise convinced Catherine and Charles that they need to strike the Protestants before the Protestants come for them. And they try to use this wedding as a big military coup. And it turns into what's called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre of 1572. So most of these French noble families are all attending the wedding, including those who were Huguenots. And Catherine orders the death of the Huguenots as they're there for the wedding. Like imagine showing up for a wedding and then there's literally soldiers there to kill you. It's pretty much the scene from Game of Thrones with their red wedding. Like that's where George R. R. Martin gets the idea from. So most of the Huguenots were killed within a day or two of the wedding itself. And then 3,000 are killed in Paris in the next 3 days, but not Henry of Navarre. That's going to be important later. So the bridegroom escapes. But about 10,000 Huguenots are killed in France in the next few weeks. Okay, so just hang in here with me for what happens next. So this next step is called the War of the Three Henrys because everybody in this story's name is Henry. So Charles dies, the second son of Catherine de' Medici. And so her third son, who is Henry the Third, he takes the throne. Now, next in line for the throne is Henry of Navarre, the bridegroom that escapes the bloody wedding. Then behind him is Henry of Guise, who forms the Catholic League and asks Philip II of Spain for help because, Philip II of Spain is extremely Catholic and the head of the Holy Roman Empire and Spain. So Guise seizes Paris and forces Henry III to make him chief minister. And Henry III has Henry of Guise killed because of that. He has, people in the government that can do those sorts of things. And he works with Henry of Navarre to retake Paris. It's like this whole double crossing situation. And Henry III, and then in the end, is stabbed to death by a monk. Like I said, this is like a whole soap opera style drama going on. But ultimately, the winner of everything is Henry of Navarre, the Huguenot Protestant, is the new king of France. So, what does Henry of Navarre, the new Protestant king of France, do? Well, naturally, he converts to Catholicism, because he says that France is more important and Paris is worth going to mass. So, it all just circles back around, crazily enough. Um, Basically, one of the big things to take away from this story is that he's going to listen to these interesting new people called politiques, which I'm sure I'm butchering the French language, but they're intellectuals frustrated by religious division. And they're going to be the ones that kind of talk him round to converting to Catholicism as a way to unite France because they basically tell him, look, you're never going to get the majority of the French people to convert to Protestantism, especially since we just lost thousands of Protestants due to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Now, Henry of Navarre is actually a pretty solid leader. He consolidates power in France and holds the nobles in check to make sure that they're not fighting each other anymore. He comes up with more royal income and he keeps the debt down and makes the monarchy stronger. He ends up issuing this verdict called the Edict of Nantes, which gives rights to Huguenots, like his family or what they used to be. And it allows more religious pluralism in France. So, just that idea that there's multiple forms of Christianity or religions happening in that country. Of course, he eventually is assassinated by a radical Catholic, but could you think of anything else, more fitting to end this story? And that's the end of our tale for today. It really is a true soap opera of events. So tune in next time to find out what's going to happen next.